Dear friends, you're going to love today's video. A few days ago, I uploaded one of my games, analyzing it in great detail and sharing all the secrets that go through my mind while I play, and you were fascinated. Why? Because when I show you one of my games, it's impossible for anyone to understand it better than I do. No one in the world will know what I was thinking. Like I always tell you, not even Magnus Carlsen, no matter how much better a player he is than me, knows what I was thinking at that moment. So in these videos, you can learn exactly what I was thinking at every moment. Let's get started. I'm going to show you this game that will fascinate you. Why? Because this isn't one of those games where I manage to checkmate quickly and it ends right away. Quite the opposite. I simply keep steadily improving my pieces more and more with each move, and as a result, I'm able to gradually lead my opponent to a place where they won't be able to do anything else. I'm not going to tell you everything that happens in the game, because then it wouldn't be any fun. Let's get to it, because you're going to love. My opponent plays the English opening against me. Here I usually like to play knight to f6. Why? Because knight to f6, I'm telling all of you, is a move that lets us react in many different ways. For example, I can follow it with g6, fianchetto my bishop, and castle. Then, if I want, I can also play d6, no worries at all. I can play e5 if I feel like it. But in this game, I felt like playing the Sicilian with reversed colors, which is this move here, e5. Careful, it's one of the most popular moves against the English opening. Why? Because my opponent isn't putting any pawns in the center, right? These four squares. So what I do is occupy it with my king's central pawn. Super simple, right? I have to tell you that. This was a very fast-paced chess game, with a time control of 3 minutes plus a 2-second increment per move, played in a tournament setting. So logically, the precision won't be the same, but I assure you it's a very, very good game. Alright, so what do? Well, I just developed my pieces. I'm going to explain everything I was thinking at this moment. I need to develop my 4 minor pieces. I'm going to start, for example, with this knight here. Since I always prefer to develop the knights before the bishops. And why do I develop the one on the king side and not the one on the queen side? Because that way I can castle suitor. It's that simple. You did it? The game continues with g3. All right, pressing. I already know that my opponent is going to develop the light squared bishop via fianchetto, so I have to be very careful with this whole diagonal. Do you see it? It's a dangerous diagonal since it's always going to be controlled thanks to the sniper from the g2 square, who will be aiming all the way to this b7 square. The idea is that usually when the opponent plays a pawn to c4, the light squared bishop almost always comes out this way. Why? Because here, this pawn would block it, and it would just get in its own way. Therefore, in the future, what I would like, let me explain. What I was thinking, is to play this move here, c6, to, let's put it this way, create a stone wall between these two pawns to block this bishop's diagonal. You already know that when a bishop runs into a wall of pawns, that's always good news for us. At this moment, for now, I wasn't planning on doing those things. There are more important things, right? Developing the minor pieces. In this case, I want to develop this bishop. Why? Because that way I'll be able to castle on the next move. I could develop it to e7. I could develop it to d6, but that would really bother me because it would block this pawn. c5 would be a great move. Or my candidate move in this case, which is bishop to b4. Alright, this move is actually much more interesting than you might really think. It might look like a simple bishop development, but it's not. Right now, I'm threatening a knight, and it's an important knight, and I'll explain why. At this point, the player with the white pieces, it's true that they haven't placed. No pawns in the center, right? But they're controlling it from a distance. They're controlling it with a knight, and they're also going to control it with the bishop. And you see where these two pieces are, at the d4 square. So the d4 square is very important. That's why here, after these two moves, bishop to g2 and short castling, my opponent tries to drive my bishop away with h3. And what would you do here? Well, would you move the bishop back, either here or here? Or would you trade it for a knight? Well, let me explain it to you. Whenever you find yourself with the option to trade pieces, you should consider who benefits from that exchange, you or your opponent. In this case, it benefits me, and I'll explain why. If I move this bishop back now, it won't do anything. On the other hand, this knight will be controlling the central squares. In this case, if I trade this bishop, which will never defend the d4 square because it's a dark squared bishop, and the one that will defend it is the light squared bishop, I'm getting rid of a bishop that won't do anything in exchange for a knight that was actually controlling these two central squares. And on top of that, what I'm also doing as a bonus is doubling. The pawns, which you'll see, will be key in the game. Alright, so it's true that I gave up the bishop pair, but it's not a big deal. A bishop is theoretically worth the same as a knight, so since this trade benefited me, I went ahead and made it. Alright, now instead of developing my knight to c6, which would be the usual move, I play this move here. c6. If you've been paying attention to what I explained a moment ago, you'll understand perfectly why I played this c6. First of all, to block this bishop's diagonal. Probably in the future I might play d5, and this pawn would be supporting it. I can also play d6 to get this structure, which is usually very good, especially when your opponent still has the d-pawn. Otherwise, this pawn can be easily attacked along the semi-open file, but since the d-pawn is still intact, let's put it that way. They can't attack this plane. So I play c6 for all these reasons, and there's even an extra benefit to this c6. At some point, my friends, the player with the white pieces is going to want to advance their d-pawn, either to d3 or d4, right? To properly develop their bishop. When they do that, which pawn is going to be left weak? Well, look, the pawn on c3, since its only defender is the pawn on d2. And so, by having played c6, this queen will be able to come to a5 to put pressure on this point that could potentially become weak. The good thing about these videos, right, is that I'm not teaching you how to win quickly, but rather I'm teaching you how to truly improve at chess, and you can watch them as many times as you need. Think of it as me giving you a lesson, with me as the teacher and you as the student. Without thinking, I'm better than you. I share everything I was thinking, and I'm sure you can draw a lot of your own conclusions. Sure enough, my opponent plays d4. At some point he had to do it, right? What does my opponent want here? I'm sure all of you know. My opponent wants me to exchange this e-pawn for his d-pawn so that he can recapture with the c-pawn and get rid of a problem. The problem is the doubled pawn here, so capturing is not an option. Do you see it? Capturing is not an option because then pawn takes would follow, and we would be completely fixing our opponent's pawn structure. And on top of that, we'd be giving him full control of the center since our only central pawn would be gone. So here we have several options. The first would be to look for the advance to e5. That wouldn't be a bad option at all. Then our idea would be to continue with the advance to e4. The idea would be to continue with d5, completely cutting off this bishop's diagonal. It's true that we'd be basically giving our opponent the chance to fix their pawn structure, and I wasn't as convinced by this plan compared to the one I used, because here it could go pawn takes pawn, and then push, let's put it that way. Push this pawn to c4 while they attack the base of the pawn chain. Those of you who've taken that class will know what I mean. And this could be attacked pretty hard. Sorry, it's like this. So here, instead of going for this e4 when they pressured me with d4, I chose this move, d6. I liked it much better. So now I have a very good, very solid structure. In case they try to open this file, I can always recapture. Thank you. And then I would be left with a central pawn, and they would have these two isolated and also double pawns. If they don't capture, it's no big deal, because I'm doing great here. I can develop my bishop wherever I want, then my knight as well, and later I can jump in here to put pressure on the weak points, so I have a magnificent position. In this case, it's a bit unfortunate to capture this pawn, but that's what the white pieces have to do. In fact, it's the best move they have right now, since any other move would really restrict their position. So my opponent captured this pawn. What's the problem with that? Obviously, it's what we just saw. The problem is basically these two pawns right here. Two isolated pawns means they don't have pawns on the adjacent files, and on top of that, they're doubled, so they're extremely weak. When you get these small advantages, as I call them, a big advantage would be having an extra piece or being up a pawn, right? Even a rook. Those would be really big advantages, right? But sometimes we have to settle for smaller advantages. In this case, what advantage do we have? Well, the opponent has these two doubled pawns, and we made that happen, not because they made a mistake, right? So here I look at this position and I feel very comfortable. I can develop my other bishop, I can develop my other knight either through d7 or a5. Sorry, through a5, through a6. Well, I see myself in a very comfortable position. And on top of that, their best piece, which is their only developed piece, the bishop on g2, is completely cut off because we've built a stone wall. Doesn't this feel like watching a movie? If you like these kinds of videos, let me know in the comments and leave a big like because I'm going to make them more often. So the idea here is, what do I do? Well, my opponent trades queens with me. I'll hunt. Why? Because if their queen didn't capture mine, I would have captured theirs. Or if not, they would have moved it away and the control of the file would have been all mine. Logically, by recapturing with the rook, I have a big advantage here. What is it? That there's only one open file in the position, and open file is one without any pawns, and the only piece controlling that open file is mine, the rook on d8. Do you see it? There isn't any rook or queen controlling that file for my opponent. Very good. Here, my opponent, well, decides to keep developing. About time, right? Actually, it's because I haven't let him develop. Why? Because we forced him to make forced moves. I'm getting a bit tangled up here. Why? Because by trading, he had to trade. Then he had to push toward the center to be able to develop his pieces properly and control it a bit, right? Careful, he's developing little by little, but so am I. We were doing truly important things in the position, as I've been explaining to you. Which should I develop first, the bishop or the knight? Well, it might seem extremely logical to develop the bishop first so as not to block it with the knight, but what was my goal? To go after these two pawns. In this kind of position, which isn't very open, and on top of that there are no queens, so we're already heading toward an endgame, we need to start maneuvering to put pressure on our opponent's weaknesses. What is our weakness? Well, careful, here I'm skipping a move, and it's actually a really important move, okay? When my opponent played knight to f3, now it's my turn. First, I played rook to e8. Sorry, I'm playing this game from memory and I just skipped a move. Don't worry, I'll fix it. This rook to e8 move is to defend the pawn that's being attacked. I'm sure many of you had already noticed that. Logically, knight to d7 would also allow for this defense, but I prefer to have it defended by the rook, because that way this knight can go attack these weaker points, and I don't have to worry about this pawn anymore. Now my opponent castles, and I play knight to b7. You get it, right? Very good. The game continues as follows. The rook from a comes to d8 to d1. Well, at this point, I already considered myself the favorite to win the game, and I'll explain why. I see a very simple plan to end up winning this game, especially because of these two pawns here. For example, I could continue with knight to c5. It's always a good idea to block isolated pawns with a knight. Remember that. It's always a very good idea. But actually, I had a much better plan, and this plan continued with knight to b6. Okay, I attacked the weaknesses. Let me ask you, friends, would it be a good idea to defend against the weakness by advancing this pawn? No, that would be a very bad idea, because I would simply go knight to a4, threatening both the c3 pawn and the c5 pawn, and there would be no way to defend both at the same time, so they would lose a pawn. So the only way they had to defend this pawn here would be with this knight to d2, right? Very good. Ideas I have here? Well, surely many of you are already seeing several winning moves here, right? The first one that should come to mind is this one here, knight to a4. It wins a pawn immediately. The only way to defend this pawn would be either with the bishop, which they would lose, or with the knight, which we would simply exchange and then attack this pawn and capture it. You get it, right? So this move had to be a candidate because it won a pawn immediately. A move that for me was even stronger is this one here, bishop to e6, so that I attack this pawn with two pieces. With which piece can this pawn be defended? With none, so it also wins a pawn. Or, in other words, I force my opponent. I make them push this pawn here. So now I'm in the same situation as before. Exactly the same. Do you get it? But with one small difference. I have this bishop developed, so I've gained a temple by developing this bishop. Do you understand the subtle difference? But for me, it was a big difference because I managed to develop a piece with a free tempo. Well, that's what I thought during the game. Now, I have to say in my opponent's favor that he made a mistake because it was a rapid game. he probably wouldn't have made this mistake in a slow game. I also have to tell you that he was in time trouble. And he immediately played this move here, defending both pawns. I understand that my opponent, given his level, which wasn't low, already knew that I could exchange and then win one of the two pawns. What I suppose is that he didn't see that here the winning move was knight takes knight. Bishop takes. And then which pawn would you capture? Well, obviously the one on c3, because I created double attack. And what was supposed to be a solution for my opponent actually made things worse, because not only do I win a pawn, but I'm also going to win the exchange. What does it mean to win the exchange? It means winning a rook in exchange for a knight. Since I'm threatening both the rook and the bishop at the same time, it's better to lose the rook if you can get the knight back, rather than lose a piece completely for free. That's why the best move is this one here, bishop to c2, and now after knight takes. And bishop takes, you can see that I have the exchange and an extra pawn. Careful. At this point, many of you are probably thinking, hey, for me, winning this is super easy. I have the exchange and an extra pawn, but I'm absolutely sure it's not that easy for everyone. I'm going to show you that if you do it right, it's very simple. I'm going to show you what plans you should make when you have a small advantage, like an exchange up, which is a rook for a bishop, and how not to let it get complicated. First of all, let's activate the last piece we have left. There's no need to go crazy. If you take your time, you'll be able to win the game without any problems. I activate this rook, and on top of that, I threaten the bishop. So he has two options, either move this bishop or move the other one, which is what he did while defending with the rook. He moves this bishop because he's also attacking the d5 square. Don't go crazy attacking. You have the advantage of a rook in exchange for a bishop and a pawn. They're not attacking a pawn, so there's no need to give it away. I simply play this f6. When I play these kinds of moves that weaken the king, I make sure that they can't come at me with any dangerous checks in this case. The only piece that can take advantage of this diagonal is the light-squared bishop, and my light-squared bishop is perfectly defending this diagonal. The king tries to join the attack. This is important, okay? When you're getting to the end of the game, your king is extremely important. So what do I do? Well, I say there's only one open file. I have the privilege of having two rooks while my opponent has one. So I'm going to double them on this file, so they work much better together than alone. So here, I double the rooks on the d file. Bishop to f3. I try to get in through the 7 file to see if I can put some pressure on my opponent. He attacks my rook, and I say, well, I'll just come over here to see if I can attack something. And my opponent defends everything well. I'm just getting more active. But of course, if I keep moving the rooks like this, I'm never going to be able to win. How should I do it? Here's a tip. When you have extra material, even if it's just a little, try to exchange pieces. Well, carefully, very carefully, without putting yourself in danger. For example, I'm going to exchange this pawn to open up even more lines. If he captures, then I'll simply recapture with the bishop, and then I'll also put pressure with this pawn, right? I want to trade pieces. It's that simple. My opponent brings the rook over to defend the pawn. Since this pawn can't be saved, it's just going to be an exchange. Pawn 4, rook 4. And here I had two ideas. I'm sure that all of you who are a bit more experienced would be very tempted to play the move rook takes f3, sacrificing the exchange. Because when the king recaptures, there's the move bishop to d5, pinning the rook to the king, and then winning back the exchange. It would just be a trade of rook and bishop for rook and bishop. Would that be a good idea? Well, of course it would be a good idea. It would be an exchange. But this forced exchange isn't necessary. Why not? Because I can simply play bishop to d5 first, threatening the rook and also threatening the bishop from behind. So the rook has to move to a square where it defends the bishop. If, for example, they decide to take this pawn, they lose the bishop. Do you see it? Therefore, the only options to come and defend the bishop are these two. They can't go here because of the pawn, so they have to come here. So here. Now, I'm sure I can exchange the rook and the bishop if I want to. That's perfect for me because I have a material advantage. First, I exchange the bishop because it's check, although really, rook for rook would have also been a good move. And whether they capture with the king or the rook, I'll be able to exchange the rook as well. The game continues like this. King takes, rook takes, king takes. And now there's much less material, so it's getting easier and easier to see. Careful not to let them capture this pawn. It wouldn't be a big deal, but it's better if they don't. So I move with the king, which is an extremely important piece, toward the center of the board, always on white squares, because my opponent's bishop is on dark squares. Everything I'm telling you here is really important. Just look at all the tips you can pick up from a single game. That's why I think these videos are so interesting. I bring the king closer on white squares, I come to defend, and now my opponent can't really do much, no matter how much they attack this pawn. I bring the rook over to defend it while attacking their other pawn, and look at what they have to do. They have to go back to defend it. And now I make a very interesting move to exchange pawns. A5, do you get? I'm giving up the pawn, yes, but if they take it, I'll take the other one. Pawn exchange, that's all it is. And if the bishop moves away, then it's a free pawn. So, much better. A pawn exchange. My opponent tries to attack my rook, but honestly, I don't really care. I could go back this way, or what I like to do, attack and take the initiative. So I start attacking these pawns over here. You know what my opponent does? They don't really have many ways to defend it, right? Because the only way to defend it would be to bring the bishop over here, but then I threaten it and capture it afterwards. Or another way my opponent could defend it would be to bring the king over, but then the king would be moving away into their own territory, and that would make it very easy for us to win the game. So my opponent decides to come over here, while I attack a pawn, he attacks one of mine. Pawn exchange. Does it benefit me? Of course, I have a material advantage, so I capture. You capture me. Careful, I'm threatening a pawn, and he's threatening another pawn. But what happens? When I capture it, my opponent can't capture it back. That would be a serious mistake. Do you know why? If my opponent captures this pawn, it would be a serious mistake, because then I come over here with check, and I'm going to take the bishop on the next move since it's also under pressure from the king. Therefore, this bishop can't be taken. My opponent, of course, sees this and tries to push this pawn, but look how quickly the game ends. I come to threaten the other pawn. He defends it. And now I want to cut off this diagonal. So first I play this move, and on the next turn I'm going to push this pawn. And the bishop will try to defend it, but it won't be possible, because then I'll simply push it forward and it won't be possible to defend this pawn. And if he pushes it, then I'll just capture it. And it's clear that one of these four pawns, with the help of my rook, is going to end up queening and becoming, for example, a good queen, right? So here my opponent, after this move, finally stops suffering and resign the game. What do you think? Good, right? Let me know in the comments. I really like this kind of video. If you would like to get even more extra information and access to additional valuable lessons, you can very simply and easily subscribe for free to my newsletter, which I will leave for you right down here in the description below, as always. Also, for all of you who are subscribed, just so you know, you'll always be the first to find out about everything new coming to the channel. I mean, everything extra that's not just the videos. I don't want to say too much, but as you loyal followers of the channel already know, very, very, very interesting things are coming soon. Sooner than ever, actually. Honestly, I can't wait to tell you all about it, because I truly believe it's one of the most exciting things I can do to make the most of this whole community and to thank all of you. So anyway, I don't want to spill the beans, but obviously if you subscribe to Later's channel, you'll always be the first to know everything. Plus, you'll also get the free lessons, right? So I hope you loved it. If you want to keep watching this kind of video, you already know that I upload a new one every day at the same time on the same channel. I hope you loved it. I won't ramble on any longer, and I'll see you tomorrow in the next video, friends. Goodbye.